The boarding area for Flight 972 to Los Angeles was buzzing with the usual mix of business travelers, vacationers, and weary commuters. At Gate C-14, 17-year-old Layla Henderson sat quietly beside her father, Captain Raymond Henderson, who was deadheading home after a week of flights. Layla clutched a small carry-on and a bright teal medical pouch containing her inhaler, clearly labeled with her name. Her father glanced at her with concern. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked. Layla nodded. "Yeah, just a little tight in the chest. I'll use the inhaler once we're settled." They had flown together countless times. But this trip was different. Layla was headed to her grandmother's funeral in Los Angeles. The atmosphere between them was somber. But their plan was simple: board, fly, and get through the day quietly. When boarding began, Layla and her father walked toward the gate. Their boarding passes were scanned without issue, and they stepped into the jet bridge. Layla felt the comforting hum of the aircraft as they boarded. But that comfort was about to shatter. Inside the cabin, a tall woman with a crisp uniform and an air of authority stood near the front. Her name tag read, Paige Morrison. She smiled politely at the passengers ahead of Layla, but her expression stiffened when her eyes landed on the teenager. "Miss, what's in that pouch?" Paige asked sharply, pointing to Layla's medical bag. "My inhaler," Layla replied, unzipping the pouch to reveal the labeled device. Paige frowned. "You can't bring medical devices on board without prior approval from the airline's medical clearance department." Captain Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "That's not correct," he said calmly. "She's carrying a standard prescription inhaler, clearly labeled. TSA guidelines and FAA regulations allow it." Paige's posture stiffened. "Sir, I'll need to verify this with security." Without waiting for a response, she gestured to two TSA agents who were boarding to handle a separate issue. "Agents, please remove this passenger until we confirm she's authorized to bring that item on the plane." The nearby passengers began to murmur. Layla's chest tightened, not just from her asthma, but from the sudden humiliation of being singled out. She tried to speak up, but her father stepped between her and the flight attendant. "Paige, I'm a captain with this airline," he said evenly. "I'm telling you, she's fine to fly with her inhaler. This isn't a safety risk." Paige crossed her arms. "Your position doesn't override procedure." By now, passengers had pulled out their phones. One woman in row 4 began live streaming. The red recording light caught Layla's eye, and she realized this moment might not stay confined to the cabin. "Let's get a supervisor," Captain Henderson said. "I am the lead on this flight." Paige replied curtly. The TSA agents exchanged uncertain glances. "Ma'am, this looks like standard medication," one said quietly. Paige ignored him and motioned toward the jet bridge. "Step off the plane, miss." Layla's breathing was worsening, and her father's voice sharpened. "She's not going anywhere without her inhaler." At that moment, a man in business attire stood up from first class. "Excuse me," he said, showing his badge. "I'm Dr. Samuel Wu, pulmonary specialist. That is a standard albuterol inhaler." Denying her access could cause a life-threatening situation. Several passengers murmured their agreement. Paige's jaw tightened. "Sir, please take your seat." Dr. Wu didn't move, not until she's allowed to keep her medication. The atmosphere shifted. What had started as a quiet boarding was now a tense standoff. The live stream viewer count ticked upward on the passenger's phone. Captain Henderson's phone buzzed, an incoming call from the airline's CEO. He glanced at it, declined, and kept his attention on his daughter. "Layla, take your inhaler now," he instructed. Paige stepped forward. "She can't use that until..." "Until what?" Henderson cut in. "Until she collapses? You're making a medical decision you're not qualified to make." The tension was thick. One of the TSA agents finally spoke up. "Sir, ma'am, we need to resolve this without causing a scene." Too late. The scene was already unfolding. Live, to hundreds of viewers. The captain took a step back and addressed the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to remember this moment. A 17-year-old girl with a valid medical device is being threatened with removal from this flight because of ignorance, not policy." A wave of whispers and head shakes swept through the rows. A mother in row 10 spoke up. "I have a diabetic child. If this is how you treat passengers with medical needs, I'm terrified to fly with him." Paige's face flushed, but she didn't back down. Captain Henderson, either your daughter leaves until this is verified, or I will request that both of you be removed. You do that, Henderson replied calmly, but you'll also explain to corporate why you denied life-saving medication to a minor. The live stream viewer count jumped again. Now thousands were watching. The stalemate broke when a voice came from the cockpit. This is Captain Rhodes. Mr. Henderson, please join me up front. Henderson leaned down to Layla. Stay put. Use your inhaler if you need to. Paige opened her mouth to protest, but he walked past her toward the cockpit. Minutes later, he returned with Captain Rhodes, who addressed Paige directly. I've confirmed with corporate policy. The passenger is allowed to carry and use her inhaler at any time. There is no violation. Paige's lips pressed into a thin line. Noted, she said stiffly. Henderson turned to the cabin. Thank you for your patience. Everyone, we'll resume boarding. But the incident was far from over. The live stream had just passed 20,000 viewers. And comments were pouring in, many calling for Paige to be fired. Layla sat back, still rattled, her inhaler in hand. She glanced at her father, who gave her a reassuring nod. But in his eyes, she saw something else, a spark of determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The rest of boarding proceeded in a tense, almost unnatural silence. Every passenger seemed hyper-aware of Paige Morrison's movements as she closed overhead bins and did her safety checks with mechanical precision. Layla felt the weight of dozens of glances, some sympathetic, others curious, but all fueled by the lingering energy from the confrontation. Dr. Samuel Wu, still seated in first class, leaned toward Layla as she passed to the restroom. If you start to feel tightness again, don't wait, use your inhaler. No one here will stop you this time. Thank you, she said softly, her voice still shaky. Meanwhile, Captain Raymond Henderson sat beside his daughter, his posture relaxed but his mind racing. He knew this was no longer just about one overzealous flight attendant, it was about a culture that could allow something like this to happen. Half an hour later, the plane taxied down the runway. Paige's voice came over the PA, smooth and professional, as if nothing had happened. Ladies and gentlemen, we're second in line for takeoff. But just as the engines roared to life, Layla felt that familiar squeeze in her chest again. She didn't want to draw more attention, but the air in the cabin felt heavier than usual. She reached for her inhaler. Paige, walking down the aisle for a final check, froze, her eyes locked on Layla's hand. Miss Henderson, she said sharply, you're not permitted to. Enough, Henderson said, rising to his feet. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the cabin like a blade. You were told by both the cockpit and policy that this medication is allowed. If you try to interfere again, I will ground this flight myself. A ripple of murmurs spread through the rows. Paige looked stunned, but before she could speak, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Captain Henderson, please join me in the cockpit. Passengers craned their necks as Henderson strode forward. Layla, now able to breathe easier after her inhaler, sat gripping the armrest. Inside the cockpit, Captain Rhodes looked troubled. Ray, I've just been informed that corporate received multiple live-streamed videos from this flight. They're trending. Legal is asking me if you intend to continue in your seat or take command. I'm not here to take command of the flight, Henderson replied, but if one of your crew is actively endangering passengers, I will not sit quietly. Rhodes exhaled. What do you want to do? First, Paige needs to step off this plane. Second, I want an immediate call to passenger relations so they can reassure every single person here that they are safe to carry prescribed medical devices. Rhodes hesitated. She's my lead flight attendant. She's a liability, Henderson countered. And right now, the public is watching in real time. Back in the cabin, the tension was palpable. Paige tried to focus on her duties, but every whisper and sideways glance seemed louder than the hum of the engines. Layla watched her carefully, torn between fear and anger. 10 minutes later, Henderson emerged from the cockpit. The plane was still on the taxiway, but it had stopped moving. Rhodes' voice came over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay due to a personnel change. Thank you for your patience. Gasps and murmurs erupted. Paige's eyes widened. You can't. I'm not doing this, Henderson said. The captain is. 2 ground crew members boarded. Without another word, Paige gathered her belongings and stepped off the plane. Her face pale but unreadable. The mood in the cabin shifted instantly. Passengers clapped quietly, some in relief, others in solidarity. Dr. Wu leaned over to Layla. That may have just saved lives beyond yours. People will hear about this. By the time the plane finally lifted into the air, Layla felt an odd mix of exhaustion and empowerment. She glanced at her father. You didn't have to do all that for me, she said. Yes, I did, Henderson replied, because if I didn't, next time it might be someone else's kid, and they might not have a parent here to fight for them. Unbeknownst to them, the live stream that had captured the entire incident had now surpassed 500,000 views. Major news outlets were already downloading the footage. Hashtags like #LetHerBreathe and #InhalerRights were beginning to trend worldwide. And when they landed in Los Angeles, neither of them would be prepared for the media storm waiting at the gate. The cabin doors opened to the warm, dry air of Los Angeles. But before Layla or her father could step into the terminal, the low hum of voices reached them, dozens of voices, overlapping, punctuated by the click of cameras and the bright glare of TV station lights. Layla froze. Dad, what is this? Raymond Henderson's jaw tightened. This, he said quietly, is what happens when a story catches fire before you've even landed. As they stepped into the jet bridge, a wall of reporters and cell phones awaited them. Layla, is it true the flight attendant threw away your medicine? One asked. Another shouted, Captain Henderson, are you going to sue the airline? Henderson didn't answer, guiding Layla toward the terminal exit. Behind them, Dr. Wu caught up, his calm presence a steady counterpoint to the chaos. If I can speak to them, he murmured, I'll focus on the medical side. Less fuel for a media frenzy. But it was too late. Somewhere in the crowd, a booming voice yelled, Let her breathe. The chant caught like wildfire. Let her breathe. Let her breathe, until the entire arrival area echoed with it. Layla's hands shook. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. And this felt less like support and more like drowning in noise. Security personnel intervened, ushering them toward a side corridor. Inside a small, glass-walled office, a woman in a navy blue suit waited, her airline badge identifying her as Marissa Flores, Director of Passenger Relations. Captain Henderson, Ms. Henderson, she began, voice smooth but clipped. I want to apologize on behalf of the airline for what happened on your flight. We take incidents like this very seriously. Henderson crossed his arms. Apologies are meaningless unless followed by change. One of your employees not only violated policy but endangered a passenger's life. What's your immediate plan to address that? Marissa's eyes flickered, but she didn't flinch. We've already placed Ms. Morrison on administrative leave pending investigation. I've also been authorized to offer your family compensation. This isn't about money, Henderson interrupted. I want assurances that every crew member in your company is trained to recognize and respect prescribed medical devices. Starting immediately, and I want a written commitment to that effect. Layla sat quietly, her mind still reeling. The words, administrative leave, echoed in her head. Paige Morrison's career might be over because of her. Marissa nodded. I'll draft a preliminary statement before you leave this airport. But Captain Henderson, with the media already involved, I suggest we coordinate messaging to avoid inflaming the situation further. Henderson gave a short, humorless laugh. The situation is already inflamed. You should be more concerned about the people watching this unfold in real time than about protecting your brand. Outside the office, the terminal buzzed with passengers still talking about the incident. A teenage boy walked by holding his phone up, whispering to a friend, That's her. From the video, Layla kept her head down. She wished she could disappear. But she also felt a strange sense of responsibility. The hashtags weren't about her anymore. They were about everyone who'd ever been told their medical needs were inconvenient. Dr. Wu lingered before leaving. Layla, he said gently, you have a chance to turn this into something that helps more than just yourself. But it's up to you how public you want to be. That night, in the quiet of their hotel room, Henderson scrolled through his phone, watching the flood of messages pour in. Some were supportive, others angry, at Paige, at the airline, at the broader issue. But one caught his eye, an email from the National Asthma Advocacy Council, asking if Layla would speak at a press conference. Dad, Layla said from across the room, What if I mess it up? What if people think I'm just trying to get attention? He set the phone down and looked at her. Speaking up isn't about attention. It's about truth. And truth has a way of finding ears that need to hear it. Layla stared at the blinking cursor on her own phone. Drafting and deleting a simple post. I'm okay. But this isn't just my story. She hit post before she could talk herself out of it. Within minutes, her words were being shared across platforms, picked up by influencers, and quoted in online articles. By morning, the number of views on the original video would double, and a movement that had started mid-flight would be unstoppable. What Layla didn't know was that Paige Morrison was already preparing her own statement, and it wasn't an apology. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains of the hotel room, but Layla barely noticed. Her phone buzzed constantly on the nightstand, the endless pings of notifications creating a low, relentless hum. She had gone to sleep with the story still trending. She woke to find it had become the top headline on multiple news sites. Her father stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. I appreciate the offer, Senator, he said evenly. We'll consider it, but my daughter's not a prop for anyone's campaign. He hung up and shook his head. Politics, he muttered. They can smell a headline from miles away. Layla pulled the covers tighter around her. Dad, Paige hasn't said anything yet, right? He hesitated. Not officially. That hesitation told Layla everything she needed to know. She's going to say something, she said flatly. An hour later, her prediction came true. As they sat in the hotel's small breakfast area, the muted TV in the corner flashed Paige Morrison's face. She stood outside her home, flanked by her attorney, microphones thrust toward her. I want to make it clear, Paige began, her tone measured but defensive, that my actions were motivated solely by concern for passenger safety. At the time, I believed the medication in question was unapproved for use in flight. I was following what I understood to be airline procedure. If my actions caused distress, that was never my intention. Layla felt heat rush to her cheeks. She's making it sound like this is my fault, like I brought something dangerous on board. The attorney stepped forward. We also want to note that the passenger's father, Captain Raymond Henderson, used his influence to have Ms. Morrison removed from the flight. We believe this was a misuse of authority and are exploring legal remedies. Henderson's jaw clenched. That's it. She wants to go public? We'll go public. Within hours, he and Layla were sitting in a quiet conference room at the headquarters of the National Asthma Advocacy Council. Cameras were being set up, microphones tested. The council's director, a brisk woman named Anita Shaw, briefed them. Layla, this is your story to tell. We're here to support you. But speak from your own experience. Facts, not anger. That's what wins people over. When the press conference began, Henderson opened with a statement. My daughter's life was endangered by someone who didn't understand the basic policies of her own profession. This isn't just about one flight attendant. This is about a lack of training that could cost lives. Then it was Layla's turn. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. I didn't want to be in the news. I didn't want people chanting my name in an airport. I just wanted to breathe. And I want every person with asthma, or any other condition, to know they should never have to fight for their right to carry the medicine that keeps them alive. The room was silent for a beat before the first wave of questions hit. Most were sympathetic. A few probed whether the incident had been exaggerated for attention. Layla answered each calmly, just as Anita had advised. By the end of the day, her speech was being shared almost as widely as the original video. But along with the support came the backlash, Paige's supporters, airline employees, and others accusing Layla of ruining someone's career. That evening, as they returned to the hotel, a folded piece of paper had been slipped under their door. Layla picked it up and unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. You think this is over? I know the truth about what happened on that plane. And so will everyone else. Her stomach dropped. Dad, this was in front of our door. Henderson took the note, his eyes scanning it once before he folded it carefully. We're not going to be intimidated, he said, but the tightness in his voice told Layla that he was already considering who might have written it, and what they might be planning. Neither of them realized that somewhere across the city, Paige Morrison was sitting at her kitchen table, recording a private video that would ignite the next stage of the fight. 2 days later, Layla awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing violently on the nightstand. She groaned, reaching for it, but the moment she saw the screen, sleep fled her completely. Exclusive. Flight attendant releases hidden truth about onboard incident, blared the headline of a trending video. The thumbnail showed Paige Morrison, eyes red but defiant, sitting in what looked like her living room. Layla's pulse quickened. "Dad, you need to see this." Within minutes, Henderson had the video playing on his laptop. Paige spoke directly to the camera, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with a careful, deliberate emotion. "Everyone's heard Layla Henderson's version of what happened," she began, "but what you haven't heard is that before the incident, I observed her using her inhaler repeatedly, in a way that seemed excessive. I asked her about it, and she refused to answer. I became concerned that the device might contain something harmful or prohibited. My decision to confiscate it was based on protecting every passenger on board." Paige leaned in, her expression sharpening. "And here's what no one knows. Shortly before takeoff, Captain Henderson entered the cabin and confronted me directly, insisting I show some respect. He used his position and reputation to pressure the captain and my supervisor into removing me from duty. This was not about passenger safety, it was personal." The video ended with Paige pleading for understanding and claiming she had been the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. Layla sat frozen. "She's twisting everything." Henderson exhaled sharply. "She's not just twisting it, she's laying the groundwork for a lawsuit." Later that afternoon, Anita Shaw called from the National Asthma Advocacy Council. The video's already at 2 million views. She said, "Paige's framing is dangerous. People are starting to question your credibility. Layla, we need to address this fast, before it turns into a he said she said stalemate." Layla rubbed her temples. "What do you want me to do? Post another statement?" "Not just a statement," Anita replied. "We have a copy of the cabin security footage. It shows the exchange between you and Paige, and it clearly captures her throwing away the inhaler. If we release it, the narrative changes instantly." Henderson's brow furrowed. "Once that footage is out, there's no going back. It'll destroy what's left of her career. Are we ready for that?" Layla hesitated. She thought about the note left at their door, the accusations flooding her social media, and the possibility of someone else getting hurt because the airline refused to train its staff properly. "Release it," she said quietly. That evening, the council posted the footage. In less than a minute of grainy, time-stamped video, the truth was undeniable. Paige taking the inhaler, ignoring Layla's protests, and tossing it into the trash. The clip ended with Dr. Wu arriving, visibly concerned, asking if Layla could breathe. The internet's reaction was immediate and explosive. Hashtags calling for Paige's permanent dismissal trended alongside ones urging airlines to overhaul their medical policies. But mixed in were darker threads, people accusing Layla of ruining lives and weaponizing social media. Late that night, Layla's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a notification, it was a direct message from an anonymous account. "You've made a lot of enemies. You should watch your back." She showed it to her father. Henderson's face was unreadable, but his voice was steady. "We'll tighten security. No more walking anywhere alone. And Layla, this is going to get worse before it gets better." Across the city, Paige sat in her dimly lit apartment, watching the footage on repeat. Her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wasn't thinking about the past anymore, she was thinking about how to make her next move hit even harder. And in her mind, she already knew exactly where to strike. The next morning, the city felt different, tense. Like the air before a thunderstorm. Layla could sense it even in the quiet of the hotel room. Henderson sat at the desk, scrolling through his email with a frown etched deep into his face. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the screen toward her. An email from an investigative news outlet filled the display. The subject line made her stomach knot. "Urgent. Request for comment on upcoming story, allegations against Layla Henderson." The body of the email was worse. It claimed to have sources, anonymous, of course, who said Layla had been disruptive on previous flights, that she had threatened a crew member once before, and that she had been coached by her father to amplify her symptoms for media attention. "She's going after my credibility," Layla whispered. "This is retaliation." Henderson said firmly. Classic smear tactic. They're hoping you'll panic and stay quiet. Before Layla could reply, Anita Shaw called. I've seen the email. Don't talk to them yet. We need to get ahead of this. That afternoon, the council held another press conference, this time flanked by legal counsel. Layla spoke first, addressing the accusations head-on. I've never threatened a crew member in my life. I've never exaggerated my symptoms. I don't need to. Anyone who's ever struggled to breathe knows there's nothing you'd fake about that. These lies are meant to distract from the real issue. Passengers deserve to be safe. And that includes having access to the medicine that keeps them alive. The legal team followed, announcing they were filing a formal defamation suit against Paige Morrison and anyone knowingly spreading false claims. Henderson added his own statement, "We will not be bullied into silence. My daughter's life was put in danger. That is not up for debate." The story exploded again, but this time the momentum shifted sharply in Layla's favor. The smear accusations fell apart under scrutiny, no evidence, no credible witnesses. In contrast, more passengers from that flight came forward publicly to describe what they had seen. Paige's refusal to return the inhaler, her dismissive tone, and the visible panic on Layla's face. 3 days later, the airline issued an official statement. They confirmed Paige's removal from her position, citing gross misconduct and violation of passenger safety protocols. They also announced a new policy ensuring that all necessary medical devices could be carried and used without interference, so long as they complied with TSA regulations. When Layla read it, relief hit her like a wave, but it was bittersweet. I didn't want this to be about ruining her career, she said quietly to her father. Henderson rested a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes accountability feels like punishment to the person who caused the harm. That's not on you. Paige, meanwhile, vanished from public view. The defamation suit moved forward, but Layla didn't follow every update. She had other things to focus on, college applications, her advocacy work with the council, and slowly, finally, moving past the shadow of that flight. Months later, she stood on a stage at a youth health conference, looking out at hundreds of faces. I used to think speaking up would just make things worse, she told them, but sometimes silence is exactly what the wrong people want. If you've been wronged, if your safety's been compromised, you have the right to speak. And you never know who might be listening that needs to hear your story. The applause that followed was loud and long. Layla smiled, a little surprised at how light she felt. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe freely, not just because of her inhaler, but because the weight of the fight was finally off her chest. Somewhere far from the conference hall, in a small, dark apartment, Paige watched a clip of that speech on her phone. Her face was unreadable. She set the phone down, poured herself a drink, and stared out the window at the city lights. She didn't say a word, but in her mind, the fight wasn't over. Not yet. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to Tell Night. At Tell Night, stories remind us that healing begins with hope, and even the gentlest kindness can rewrite a destiny. Don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss a story that could brighten your day or transform your perspective. Until our next story, keep your heart open and your spirit brave.